The British Grand Prix, and the biggest story from free practice one wasn't Max Verstappen going fastest, it was Alex Albon in the Williams in third position. And everybody is asking what is going on with the Anglo-Thai drivers Williams around the Silverstone circuit. Well, for some people, this doesn't come as a great surprise. The Williams FW45 has been one of the big surprise packages of the 2023 season. The blue-painted car has proven itself to be a real shock in the midfield, getting through to Q3 at some races. The car itself is really special, and we'll look in a bit more detail at it in a moment. But the biggest change for the 2023 season for the Williams team was its team management. The technical director and the former team boss left the team over the winter to be replaced with a new team boss, James Vowles from Mercedes, and a technical director who is yet to be appointed. But when James Vowles arrived from Mercedes with all of its resources to the underfunded British team, he decided to take a look at what he found, and this is what he had to say about his first impressions of arriving at Williams.
Obviously, coming in here, I had an expectation of what would be in place and perhaps missing in the team. And I think for the most part, it's about what I expected. Some areas possibly a little bit more in a situation of being suffered or suffering just simply through lack of investment for a number of years. But there's a wealth of incredible people that just want to work their socks off to get where we are today. And what came across really in the last few months is just this overwhelming desire to move forward on the grid. And the team will do what it takes to get there.
Well, it's clear to see that James Vowles believes that Williams has the great foundation for a really strong future. But let's not forget, the team has a really strong past. They know how to win Grand Prix. At the British Grand Prix, they're celebrating 800 races in the sport. Now, I'm not quite sure how they worked out that number, because every number I come up to doesn't come up with 800. And of course, the first ever Williams cars were not raced by the Williams team as we know it today. They were run by Frank Williams Racing, which went on to become the Wolf team. But history aside, the real story is all about now and the Williams FW45. The car itself is pretty much a gentle evolution of last year's design, but with a few refinements. However, that car's characteristics have carried over. It's got push rod front suspension and a pull rod rear, and the concept is much of a muchness. But one of the characteristics that has carried through is the car's ability to go down a straight extremely quickly. Now, we saw this in quite a lot of detail at the Canadian Grand Prix. It was really clearly shown up by Alex Albon. And then here we see the data of Albon's car in qualifying compared to that of Max Verstappen. Now, look on the circuit map here. You can see in blue where Albon's car was quicker than Verstappen around the Canadian lap. And you can see it's all the straight bits. And actually, Verstappen is only quicker in the yellow bits here for a couple of little twiddly corner bits. That made all of the difference, nearly 0.4 of a second around the lap. The Red Bull downforce really making a big difference. And let's not forget, the Red Bull is no slouch on the straights either. But the Williams at peak speed was 13 kph faster than the Red Bull. And that characteristic is something we've seen all season long at every single different circuit we go to, including, of course, here at Silverstone. Again, you can see on the really high-speed sections of track, the Williams is so fast. It's the fastest car on track. And again, quicker than Max Verstappen down the straights. With Alex Albon third in free practice one, that's got to have everybody a little bit worried, because everyone's asking, is that pace real? Well, we'll find out as the weekend goes on. But when he set that lap, he was actually running a heavier fuel load than Max Verstappen was like for like. Still quite a big gap between the cars, nearly half a second. And of course, as you all saw earlier in free practice 2, I took a really long, detailed look at this data, and that's why I'm sort of brushing past it here. Red Bull again quicker through some of the twisty bits, but actually the Williams doesn't seem to be a complete disaster. And that's something to do with what the Williams team have been doing to develop the car as the season has gone on. And that development race really started at the Monaco Grand Prix, where the team were taking a really good, long, hard look at the rear wing of the car. And they tried a couple of different versions of the rear wing out. And actually, Alex Albon had a little bit of a mishap in free practice there and destroyed the shiny new rear wing on his car. One of the other parts that almost every team on the grid is looking at, and Williams is no exclusion to this, is the rear lower beam wing. And here you can see the version the team are running at Silverstone. Well, at Monaco, Again, the Williams team tried a different lower beam ring solution, and Dave Robson explains why the teams are experimenting with this part of the car so much every single race.
I think the reason we see quite a few variants of them is they're relatively cheap compared to redoing the whole upper element. So I think they give the teams a good opportunity to move up and down the drag and downforce level on the cheap, basically.
Of course, Williams' big upgrade package came in Canada, and that's why they've not really bought many big parts to the British Grand Prix. But that upgrade package was pretty fundamental. You can see what they started the season with, looking at this great view from the rear wing. We took this earlier in the season, and you can see that distinctive shape across the back of the car that we're seeing so often on so many cars. Some people, like me, say it's Ferrari-inspired. Other people say it might be Alpine-inspired, because you have this very distinctive soap dish shape, I like to call it, around the side of the side pod, and that's all to do with reducing the drag on the bodywork. Well, we already know that the Williams is an extremely low drag car. It just doesn't really like going around the corners, and that's what the team has been trying to address with these upgrades. Not losing out on that top speed performance. They want to keep it really slippery down the straights, but they also want the car to be able to stick to the road as it goes through the corners, and that's something that they've been doing by changing the side pod concept quite significantly, but you do have to look quite closely. So this is Logan Sargeant's car at the Canadian Grand Prix using the old side pod package that we just saw from above. You can see this very distinctive shape dropping down, and that's where the soap dish shape really kicks in. You can't really see it in this angle, but you can see that shape very distinctly. Well, Alex Albon, he was given the new package, and you can see the shape here is extremely different. It's much smoother in terms of that drop down, but you can also see that big, deep gully here forming, much more like the Aston Martin or the Alpine concept, and the concept that a few teams are beginning to explore a little bit more, and that seems to be working really well. It's aided the cornering performance of the car by the look of it, but hasn't lost that top speed characteristics. You can see it again really clearly from the rear. Keep an eye on that Doralton Ventures logo on the side of the side pod. This is Logan Sargeant's car in Canada, and look how the side pod drops down very abruptly, very aggressively. If you look again at Alex Albon's car, same race, play it forward a little bit, you can just see that slope, that ramp. Some people call it a water slide. I don't really know why, but you can see that ramp shape. It's not nearly as aggressive as you see on some of the other cars. But Williams, the big thing they're talking about now isn't actually their aerodynamic upgrades. Williams has a big advantage in terms of aerodynamic upgrades because it finished last in the Constructors' Championship last year, and it was in penultimate position at the reset earlier this year. And that means that they have a huge aerodynamic testing allowance, lots of CFD, lots of wind tunnel time, more than double that of Red Bull, for example. But Williams is really struggling to make the most out of that. And actually, James Vowles was quite open about that during the Canadian Grand Prix weekend and highlighted that the real weakness for Williams isn't its ability to upgrade the car, it's actually its ability to develop its factory.
It's all publicly available, but if you actually go and look at Companies House, you can sort of see that the numbers we're talking about here is hundreds of millions, not 10 million or 20 million, but hundreds of millions to sort of catch up with the level of investment from where Williams is today to perhaps the most extreme expenditures you see in the sport. That's a big deficit. And what it's leading to is Formula One, the FI, and other teams have been supportive in this. What we're looking for at the moment is the ability to have sporting equity, the ability to have infrastructure that matches our peers, such that we're not fighting with one hand behind our back, but fighting in the same way as other people are.
Well, even if Williams doesn't get the change in the rules that it really wants, it doesn't mean the car isn't going to develop aerodynamically anyway. It certainly is. In fact, some people have been commenting earlier in the year how basic the floor of the Williams looked after the car got, well, driver revealed, shall we say, after a little bit of a mishap out on track. And people said the floor looked really simple. Well, yes, it's more simple than some of the floors we've seen on cranes this season, but it is still a hugely effective and interesting design. So much so that Red Bull has admitted copying Williams, not the other way around when it comes to floor design. But the biggest thing for Williams is that low drag characteristic of the car. We've seen it at every race so far, as I said earlier on, and that does bode well for the future. The last time we saw a low drag car as extreme as this year's Williams was back in 2009, when we had the Force India, which couldn't go around corners very well at all, but it was an absolute dragster down the straights. Like the Williams, it set the fastest speed trap times at every single circuit, but it didn't score any points all year long until the cars arrived at Spa and Monza, and the drivers for that team nearly won both Grand Prix. So that bodes well for Williams with the Belgian Grand Prix coming up, that very high-speed track at Spa-Francorchamps, and then after the summer break going to Monza, where the similar characteristic of the car should pay big dividends. But with a US driver in one of its two cars, I wonder, with the new street circuit, high-speed street circuit in Nevada, when it comes to the end of the year, will Williams and the team who support it be singing Viva Las Vegas?